All right, today with lesson 4, Graphs to Persuade, we're going to talk about 3 ways that a completed graph can be drawn to be misleading with its data or with its information that it wants to give you. So in the very first part of the notes, you have all 3 of those ways. So I'm going to kind of zoom in and talk about each of them. So in example number 1, the interval on the vertical axis does not start at 0. So I'm going to highlight that. You can see that on the y-axis here, it does not start at 0. So this data information can be misleading because when you look at the average annual rainfall, you can see that the cities across the bottom, starting with Albany and Seattle, have the lowest amount of rainfall. And it looks like they don't have very much rainfall at all, when in fact they do, because this does not start at 0. You can quickly see that those bars go up to 30 inches of annual average rainfall, which is quite a bit of rainfall in a year. And then the other cities, Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, and St. Louis, all average more than that. So the fact that it does not start at 0 leads you to believe that it doesn't have as much rainfall, but in fact it does. Graph number 2. There may be a break in the graph. So your second reason for having a graph that may be misleading is that there may be, and this is not very clear, what we call a break. It kind of looks like a Z in the graph between the 2 data points. If you look at the y-axis on this graph, you can see that they're counting by tens, but in this very little gap right here, it actually skips counting by 10, and it makes those bars appear lower again because of the break in the graph. And then graph number 3, the intervals on the horizontal and vertical axis may have unequal intervals. So your third reason for having a misleading graph is unequal intervals. You can kind of see that on the y-axis here, it counts from 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and then it switches over and it starts counting by tens, 30, 40, 50, 60 on the top. Therefore, when you count by those tens versus those fives, it kind of scrunches the data at the top half, and it makes it seem like it's standing still. Whereas at the bottom half of the graph, it looks like the data kind of went really quickly up in those graphs. So when you count in an uneven interval, it also gives you uneven data. So the perception of these 3 graphs is a little bit different because the graphs were leading you to believe different things. They were persuading you to believe different things. So the 3 misleading reasons a graph may be misleading are: they may not start at 0, there may be a break in the graph, or you may see some unequal intervals, and those intervals can be on either X or Y. So in this little center section, mean, median, and mode can also be used to mislead. Consider a set of data where most of the numbers are a certain range. There are a few numbers that are either way above or way below the range. Remember, range is our high, the difference between our high and our low in data. The mean is not a good measure of data in this case. So in these examples that you see below, explain which of the following graphs you would use to present the information. So the first thing you need to do is you need to look at the information. It's U.S. commercial airline traffic. It has the years on the bottom. It has the departures in millions of dollars made, or not made, millions of departures made in airline traffic. And you can see that these graphs look extremely different. The first thing that I notice is that the years are all identical. So we know that the x-axis information is the same. But when I look at the y-axis, I can see a few things. They both start at 0, but the graph on the left counts by intervals of half, where the graph on the right counts at intervals of 1 full. And then the intervals on the left start with a break in the graph, because I can see I go from 0 to 6. And when I do that over here, you can see that information as kind of looks what to be missing. So it looks like that graph is much higher. But really, they are the same graph, just with the different intervals and the break in the graph. They look very much different. So which of these would I use to present the information and why? Well, if I wanted to persuade somebody, I'm going to use this graph right here because that break kind of condenses my information and it allows the scale on the y-axis to better fit the data. So the scale better fits the data. And I would use that one on the left to see that the airlines are having tons of planes and it's increasing over every single year. Whereas the one on the right, the data kind of stays flatlined. It doesn't really seem like a lot of departures are on commercial airline flights. So your job in these 3 questions is to use the U.S. endangered species chart that is presented to the left and enter those 3 answers in Canvas.